Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. I am Shogun. Today we have a podcast about Michael Hastings and his apparent assassination, possibly by the military, after he was writing some articles critical of certain generals in the military. So our guest today will be the Real Gaming Geek. This will be a bit of a presentation style podcast. So he'll do his presentation. After that, we'll have open discussion and question and answer. Before we get started, we're the Roundtable Discord server. Please find us by Googling Roundtable Discord. You can get us through the politics or conspiracy theory sections of Discord. We're on all social media. We're streaming on Twitch. We have a YouTube channel. It's all through the RT podcast section of the server. Welcome to our live audience and to our guest, the Gaming Geek. How are you, Gaming Geek?
Good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So given that you're prepared a presentation, we're just going to give you the mic. We're going to let you do your thing. You'll post your sources and images in the recorded voice channel. Everybody can participate there, and whenever you're done, you can open it up for questions.
All right, thank you. Real quick question to the audience before we get started. I want to make sure everyone knows. How many of you are familiar or have a general idea of who Hastings is and what happened, more or less? Just so I know what I can filter out to keep this basic.
I have no idea.
I'll jump in and just say, don't assume any knowledge of the audience, because there inevitably will be people who don't know the story. So you're gonna have to treat it as though everyone knows nothing, essentially.
All right. So Michael Hastings was a journalist and war correspondent. He worked for mostly freelance for a variety of different news sources: Rolling Stone, Newsweek, BuzzFeed, a whole bunch of different places. And basically what he did was he was a correspondent. He covered people like General Stanley McChrystal, the Obama campaign trail, all sorts of different places. And his work led to the direct result was the firing of General Stanley McChrystal, who was at the time the commander of the U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. So he had quite a bit of weight behind what he said. In fact, if you were paying attention to the news a lot, especially during the early 2010s, like 2010, 2011, 2012, you probably heard of or heard him directly on some news station, Fox, CNN, whatever one you watched or listened to. He was pretty well-to-do. So Michael Hastings, he was, he got, in the last few days and weeks of his life, he started becoming increasingly paranoid. He had just found out, because Snowden had just dropped the NSA files onto the internet. So he was starting to get an interest in the U.S. mass surveillance industry. And so he started looking at, different cases of what happened. Inevitably, what ended up happening, though, is he started suspecting that people were, monitoring his calls, keeping tabs on him, following him. And he started growing paranoid. And one day, 12 hours before his death, he sent an email to his coworkers saying that he suspected that there was going to be FBI interviewing his close friends and associates and family, and that if this should happen to any of them, they should consult legal practices to help them, not have to basically to just keep them safe until they could, divulge proper information without being pressured unlawfully by the FBI. However, 12 hours later, at 4:22 a.m. in June of 2013, he died in his Mercedes C250 sports coupe by supposedly crashing into a tree and dying in a head-on blunt force collision. So ultimately, this is the crash site that I'm going to be putting up. This was a couple different pictures, and this is morning after the crash. And this is the burned out remains of his vehicle. His vehicle supposedly hit this tree, caught fire, and then blew up, killing him. The actual fire is shockingly large for a vehicle of his size and build, which, people were rather suspicious because people question, how does a vehicle explode? And if you were to watch security footage from a local pizzeria that caught him right before the explosion, you're going to see a flash followed up by the major explosion. It dies down, and then you can see the fires burning in the background. And what this directly correlates, at least to myself, is there was some sort of explosive device, most likely planted in the vehicle, because you can see the vehicle is still moving when that initial flash happens before it actually stops moving and is sitting up against the tree. So, do we have any questions so far?
Moving cars can explode, though.
Where's the photograph you talking about? Where you posting it at?
They are
Recorded
in
event.
recorded events chat.
Yeah, OpenEye. If you just look a few channels up, you'll see the Rec Event channel. That's always the one we use for special events. I'll post it in general and as well if anyone's having trouble finding.
Okay. So, the first thing I really want to get into, though, is, what were the odds of his car actually catching fire in a normal situation where his car would hit the tree and then catch fire? So, this is, an interesting case because as I looked through the National Fire Protection Association, it's saying that from, this is slightly older data than at the time of the crash, but from 2003 to 2007, there was an annual average of only 480 fatalities from car fires. So in those 4 years, there's only 480 people approximately died. And only 3% of the fires were caused by a collision or rollover. So if this trend of car safety, if cars got safer as years went on, then these numbers should be going down by the time we reach 2013. So the odds of his car actually catching fire in 2013 should actually be quite a bit lower than 3%. If you take into the account the U.S. vehicle population, which is about 270 million, and the average number of car fires per year, which is about 171,000, and this is according to the USFA, you actually find out that the odds of his vehicle ending up in a vehicle fire is about 1,574 to 1. So percentage-wise, he had about a 0.0006% chance of having a fire start up in his vehicle from a collision.
Well, you're only talking about like fatalities.
Well, fatalities was the first 7 numbers. That's the 480 people. The second number is referring to the number of car fires annually, according to the USFA. So the number of fires was 171,000, whereas the number of people who died in those fires was about 480. So essentially what we have here is an extremely low chance of a vehicle fire, and yet we have a massive explosion before we even actually have a collision with the object, which in this case was a palm tree. So what we have is, after quite a bit of research, if you look at the video footage, this is taken from video footage. These are almost back-to-back frames in the footage. And the first frame at the top is his taillights. And the second frame, you can see that those taillights widen significantly. That's the initial flash to the side, out the left-hand driver's side. You have, again, a brief moment where everything goes dark. And then in the final picture, which is not even a second after the first frame, you have the massive lights and fires from the explosions, and that's where his car is finally up against the tree. So the most likely cause of something like this is, an explosive device of some kind, obviously. However, eyewitnesses to the crash said that there were sparks flying from the side of Hastings' car. So the odds of it being a full-on explosive device are actually almost zero now. It's actually more likely that this was a thermite incendiary device, which you can see in this picture. Thermite devices, as they are detonating, throw off a shower of what are sparks. However, they're actually little droplets of molten iron or copper, depending on what the base material used in the device is. So that would be a direct explanation of what you can see shooting out from the side of his vehicle for no apparent reason. So if we put this down to thermite, then that will explain certainly why the vehicle exploded, because once this device goes off, it's going to start a massive fire, which will cause the vehicle's gas tank to explode, causing a massive fireball and causing the vehicle to burn for quite a while after the actual crash. Moving out of the explosives category, I wanted to next look at, the people who responded. The first responders who arrived on scene were LAPD and LAFD. They were there and they set up their equipment, which took them about a minute once the fire truck arrived. And then what ended up happening was they waited and confirmed with passersby that Michael Hastings was in fact dead before they actually turned their hoses on and started spraying down the vehicle. They were asking for about a solid 30 seconds after their equipment was ready, is the man dead? Which is really curious, because I interviewed a former firefighter, and he stated that we always immediately went into action to try and save a life, even if that life was even if the person was already dead, because you always have to take these situations like there might be life at stake, which means these people were not ready to save his life. They wanted to make sure that, yes, he was in fact dead, that no one had actually made it out of the vehicle alive, which brings us into the next point of the LAPD who showed up on the scene. Michael Hastings was traveling down North Highland Avenue. He was moving south. And before crashing, he ran a red light directly in front of a Los Angeles Police Department cruiser, who did not give chase. They continued to sit in the parking lot of a gas station. And they did not actually give chase or move at all until the police dispatch stated that we have a crash on North Highland Avenue. At that point, the police cruiser started moving, and they responded to the crash site. Another rather interesting thing, because general police response to anyone who runs a red light right in front of them would be to pull over the vehicle and find out what was going on with the driver, and most likely give them a ticket for what they were doing. So why they didn't respond is obvious. They were clearly, there to observe him moving. They didn't respond until they heard news of the crash, because once the crash occurred, they were going to make sure no one made it out of that crash. So moving through the crash, we're now going to move to the after effects of the crash. During the crash, Mr. Hastings' engine was ejected from the vehicle, which is not too it's not unheard of for a high-speed collision like his. What is unusual is the engine was actually ejected. The engine powertrain was ejected about 120 feet from the crash down this street. And I have a picture here to show about how far that distance is. So in the picture you can see the one palm tree is where he impacted, and the far end of the street, farther south down, is where the engine ultimately landed at the base of a light pole. And I will now show a picture of his engine. So this is two different angles on his engine. So an interesting thing about his engine is his vehicle is rated as a Mercedes C250 is a gasoline engine. However, the engine you're looking at is actually a diesel engine, not a gasoline engine, which is interesting because they're quite a bit heavier. They obviously require diesel instead of gasoline, which is all very interesting. And what makes it interesting is because if this was in fact a diesel engine, diesel fuel combusts at much higher temperatures than gasoline. So it would explain why a powerful device like, say, a thermite bomb would be necessary over, say, something simple like a set of firecrackers, because you would need a lot more force to actually ignite the fuel tank. A set of firecrackers probably wouldn't even be able to break through the walls of the tank, let alone ignite the diesel fuel necessary. But again, the interesting thing is, since this crash was high enough speed to, full on eject his engine 120 feet down the road, it's interesting why he, wasn't ejected himself, because I have pictures, however, I won't show them because they are very graphic, of him post-crash, and he does not actually appear to be wearing a seatbelt of any kind. What is evident, though, is he is partially melted to the ceiling of his car. Either his shirt or his skin is affixed to the ceiling. So if he had no, seatbelt on, he should have actually been ejected just like his engine was. So, do we have any questions so far? No? All right. So moving on to the next major portion, this is going to be the bulk of this, his autopsy report, which is where a lot of the most interesting evidence sits. So his autopsy report was conducted by the LA County Coroner's Office, and it was performed by Dr. James K. Ribe. He's a medical examiner, and there's several things I'll go into concerning him. Here is a link, though, to a copy of the coroner's report. This is the report they filed 3 days after his crash, actually, which is incredibly interesting since most reports take weeks to actually do, especially on a body that was as mangled as his. But there's a number of interesting things throughout. We'll start with the medical examiner, Dr. Ribe. Dr. Ribe was actually found guilty of falsifying evidence in 2003 in a murder trial, and the fact that he falsified the evidence led to the defendant, who was being accused of murder, being acquitted. So he has a history of falsifying evidence for a court of law, which makes it's real interesting. He was never sentenced to anything, even though he was found guilty, and he was allowed to continue working at the LA County Coroner's Office, which is also really interesting since it was at that office he was falsifying evidence. But throughout here's Dr. Ribe's signature at the bottom of the autopsy report, and then here is one of the most interesting parts of the report. In the report, it states that for evidence, none was collected from the scene, which is extremely suspicious because in a scene like this, there's a car obviously sitting there right on scene, but there's all the bits of scrap scattered about. There were bottles, littering the area, which they could have taken and tested for his DNA to see if he had been drinking. There were so many different things they could have collected from the scene, yet here it's saying they took nothing, which is really unusual for a suspicious car crash like this that resulted in an explosion, because you have to take into account, what could have caused this explosion, every possible angle. There's obviously the natural reasons, or as we've discussed, there's the possibility of explosive devices being on the vehicle, which would have left, some sort of evidence most likely on the scene. So, but they collected no evidence. Next, we have another interesting fact is we have in this line is discussing his body. It says partially charred remains with heavily charred over the head, moderately over the neck and left side of the body, left extremities, with post-mortem thermal fracturing of the left forearm and left lower leg and foot. So the post-mortem thermal fracturing is essentially his bones broke after he died from the intense heat of the vehicle, which is interesting because if you were to look at the picture of his body, his arm appears to be perfectly fine. There's no sign of breakage throughout. And if you actually were to look at where his left leg would be, there is no leg. His entire lower left leg from about the knee down is completely missing, going against the autopsy report and also what two of the firefighters claimed in that report as well, which was that his left foot was actually missing a shoe. So that is another rise to doubt, because when they're claiming, oh, he has a broken left leg from post-mortem thermal fracturing and there's no leg, that's a completely different thing. That's a violent amputation, not a thermal fracture. So do we have any questions regarding the autopsy report so far?
Well, one thing I'd like to say to you is I'm active in EMS and I've seen a lot of nasty calls out there. But I know from my training, I believe the human body combusts at, I think it's 450 degrees. Open, can you close your mic? The body naturally combusts at, I think it's 450 degrees, so it actually catches fire. So if you put a body in enough heat, I mean, I saw a crash, like it was like my third day in. We're like, well, where's the guy's leg at? Well, we're looking everywhere for it, and a medical examiner says, well, it just combusted. It's just gone. It's like burning a piece of paper. It just goes away and disappears. So I don't think. I just wanted to put that input there that there's certain things that can just kind of disappear. Because I mean, I've seen people where we went and searched for. We did a whole mile round radius trying to find a leg, and we're like, if this leg went more than a mile, then it must have been going 1,000, 2,000 miles an hour. Would have blown apart just from the sheer forces of it. So.
I can hear you. I couldn't hear The Real Gaming Geek.
I don't know what it is.
Did I miss the flat Earth stuff?
Yeah, you missed it, but you can catch all our past events, including our multiple flat Earth events.
Now
They're all recorded.
recording.
Okay, thank you.
So, resuming the Michael Hastings event, are you still there, Gaming Geek? Apparently, he's not there. So, unless anybody has any thoughts on it until he gets back.
His claim? I wasn't listening initially. What's his initial?
He's talking about the Michael Hastings murder, really. He's a journalist. They said he died in a car crash, but it seems fairly obvious that he was a targeted killing.
And is there any speculation as?
Well, one thing that Gaming Geek was saying is that he had some sensitive information. He apparently had sensitive information from about the CIA, and he had called his. It was a lawyer, a friend of his had called her, Jennifer Robinson, I believe it was, and had said, "I've got sensitive information." And then 3 hours later, out of nowhere, he gets in a car crash. Car bursts into flames, and he dies, and there's no recognition of his body. The only recognition was fingerprints compared to FBI records.
Well, I'm still not sure if you can hear us or not. So maybe we can just open it up to the floor. I'm kind of curious because I don't know too much about this whole situation. Why is his death significant, and why would he be targeted?
I think his death is significant because I mean, we can get into a whole bunch of you could get into a whole list of conspiracy theories of what I want to say, but try to stay focused on the one main thing, which is the topic we're talking about. And if you if you heard, if you worked at a company, for instance, and your company was going to do something, and then you heard that somebody had information, like it got leaked out, you would do whatever you could to make sure that person didn't tell everybody else. And I think the whole conspiracy is that the government heard that he new information, and I read on Wikipedia, which you can call a credible source, you can't, but actually I have the article up, and I think it was the former National Defense Security, I forget what his name was, but he pretty much said that he believed that the government has the ability to is the U.S. National Coordinator for Security, Infrastructure Protection, and Counterterrorism, which is Richard A. Clark, said that it was the crash was consistent with a car cyber attack. He was quoted as saying, "This is a direct quote. I'll post it in chat if you'd like. There is a reason to believe that intelligence agencies for major powers, including the U.S., know how to remotely seize control of a car. So if there were a cyber attack on Hastings' car, and I'm not saying there was, I think whoever did it would probably get away with it." Now, that's the U.S. National Coordinator for Security, Infrastructure Protection, and Counterterrorism, Richard A. Clark quote.
Now, what the alleged information that he was killed over for?
I don't know that.
No, it's just top secret. It was it like corporate warfare. It was the government, obviously, right? The CIA. So I'm taking it he had information that would be detrimental to the United States government, or maybe the CIA themselves.
I mean, there was in this article, there is a thing that a couple years prior, his brother had said that he totally rules out foul play because his brother had a manic episode before, and his brother had come down the same day, and then to like calm him down or like bring him back to Vermont, and his brother snuck out, and then a couple hours, and then like I think it was an hour later, he got the call that his brother car had crashed and caught fire, and this guy Hastings had actually gone to see a friend of his to borrow her Volvo because he thought there was something wrong with his car, that something was going to happen. He kind of predicted his own death, essentially.
Now, interesting.
This Wikipedia article has a lot. I'm actually just going to post it in because if you go down to the country over alleged foul play, it has a lot of stuff that's really interesting. And it's like this guy, I think, kind of knew what was going to happen, and then it happened, and people, I guess, just thought he was crazy.
So, what are the ramifications of his death? Is it bringing more things to light? Is it just adding fuel to the fire of what's already going on? Or is it like going to, close more information or shut off information?
I mean, it kind of gets into an iffy topic where I personally believe, and this is, for me, it's science fiction, but at the same time, I'm always a strong believer that I relate it to religion. I know there's a higher power. I know Jesus exists. I know God exists. That's my belief. And I apply that same thing to the government. That there are organizations and things out there that we can't totally prove, but we have evidence of things that happen and technology they have, kind of like what NSA goes off a lot about. I think all of that's real. So I think there is some government involvement, and I think they have power to do things that we don't know about, and I think they keep that power for a reason to protect themselves, as a security thing, I guess, in their minds, to protect the American people. But I always believe that there is something higher, there's a greater power that is there that nobody's going to tell us about, or we're gonna see it and then make speculations of it, but they're never gonna what's the word for it? Farming.
Yeah, I do share a lot of those beliefs as well. They're definitely hiding more than they're letting on to. Um, I guess another question I'd have about this gentleman is what kind of journalism was he mostly known for? I mean, he's an investigative journalist, I'm assuming. So, what has he investigated in the past? I mean, if no one has the answer, that's completely fine.
Oh,
Look it up.
I think you're relating it to him if he was there.
Oh, no, it's pretty much an open question. I'm trying to figure out the mystery myself, right? Because I'm a conspiracy realist as well. Um, I think these things are all interconnected. However, I don't have the information at hand. So, um,
Well, I know that in the first couple sentences of the Wikipedia article, he said his fiance, which I can't pronounce her last name, Andrea, was killed in an ambush. And then Hastings wrote a book called "I Lost My Love in Baghdad: A Modern War Story," which was in 2008, and it was a memoir about his relationships with her and the insurgency that took her life. And I think his main goal was to find out the real reason why insurgency groups in the U.S. military were really doing what they were doing. And I think that bothered the U.S. government because he was digging and trying to find things about them that they didn't want him to know about, they didn't want the public to know about.
yeah, I'm looking over his Wikipedia page as well, and it's some pretty interesting stuff. He starts off with I lost my love in Baghdad. He lost his fiance to a gun ambush. He had an interview with Stanley McChrystal. Not too sure. Army General Stanley McChrystal, then commander of NATO's International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. McChrystal's staffs were overtly critical and contemptuous of White House staff and other civilian officials on June 22nd. So he's got another book, The Operators, Occupy Wall Street, Bergall, America's Last. Oh, that's the um, the 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 traitor that left, he went AWOL, and we lost 6 soldiers looking for him, and we lost. We also had to trade. I think I'm not sure, but there was a certain amount of known terrorists that we had at Guantanamo. I'm sure they're keeping them to trade for this guy. So
There's one thing I'm going to direct to you, Merlin, and this is 100% rhetorical, and don't take offense to it. And I'll have a follow up to it, and I don't expect you to answer this whatsoever. From you being in the Marines, I wouldn't be surprised if some officials have told you that you can't repeat anything you're going to see, or there's certain things that you've seen that you don't want to repeat. And that's all I'm going to say about that. My friend Roy, who was in the Army for 32 years, 8 months, said to me, he says, there's stuff about certain Air Force aircraft that he can't specify it. And he said, if 10 years from now, I can discuss it. I have a 10-year clearance. And after that, I can discuss as much as I want. I said, well, what is it? And I went on his phone and I typed in the SR-72, the successor for the SR-71. And he said to me the next day, he says, you typed that in my phone, and I got a phone call that says I can't look that up. I was like, okay, that was it. So, I mean, I think there's things that you've seen or whatever. I'm not going to ask you what they are. I don't expect you to elaborate on them. But if you get what I'm saying, there's certain things the government does not want people to know for a very specific reason. And if they find out, they're going to do whatever they can to get rid of that person.
I mean, as far as my own personal experiences, I was just like a lowly air winger, like I was just a maintenance guy. So I wasn't really exposed to so much. I had a secret clearance, but that was more for radio codes. They change the radio codes every time they have different flights and stuff, for obvious reasons. But and I did also participate in some war activities or war exercises, simulating war with other countries. I've talked about that before in the VC at the Roundtable Discord server. Join us. I like to throw that in there whenever I can. But yeah, no, I mean, not much, man. I saw $150 million fire go up in Afghanistan because some person threw their cigarette butt in the wrong place. That was pretty interesting. But there are things, like like we couldn't take pictures that showed our background. That was for some more security reasons. They've normalized some things that I like looking back now. Like for instance, it was pretty known that we would patrol poppy fields, so we would protect them, from whomever wanted the fucking drug, and like that's like freaking armed guard for the CIA's drug money. Now looking at it, or like because I was in a helicopter squadron. I mean, we we brought back a lot of people who are terrorists, quotation marks. We didn't know who they are. They just got bags over their heads and they go right into a freaking fucking I don't know what they went into I think a 7-ton or something. But I've only seen them get off the airplane. But yeah, so personally, it's interesting that like I see this guy's Wikipedia page. I mean, his story pretty much starts in the same area, right? Like it starts off with losing his fiance in a war, and that's what's brings him down this rabbit hole. I haven't had too much of a look at further of his page, but I can see that his death is well documented, as the Real Gaming Geek was talking about. And so there's another part here that says about FBI files. So the FBI files on Michael Hasting and its attachments, 21 in total, released to the public on September 24th after it's investigated, journal, doctor, blah, blah, blah. The FBI failed to respond to the requests that allotted a 20-day period. I guess this is what's saying not much, honestly. I really don't understand what it means. But yeah, it's does anybody else have an opinion on this guy's death? I mean, like one thing that kind of strikes me is it was kind of what Trucker was talking on about, about this government having, access to technology, or, like the religious aspect of these,
Greater power.
yeah, a greater power. And, I mean, in my research of conspiracy theories, I've come to find that there are a lot of high, powerful people within the political realm. The Clintons, the Obamas, the freaking Trudeau's, or like and their connections with the Illuminati, the Cabal, the Freemasons, and it seems that he was also. Going down a similar rabbit hole. Um, he looks into Occupy Wall Street to, um, check out the mass gatherings associated with public protests. And, I wish I knew more. I wish I did. Go ahead.
If you look at his selected publications, it seems like every single one has to do with U.S. foreign policy and wars. I can't find one on here that has nothing to do with it. The only one I can see on is the one in 2012 when he was talking about Obama's final campaign. Other than that, everything else is about war or U.S. foreign policy. And I have a feeling that the U.S. government knew what he knew and killed him for that reason. But at the same time, do I believe that there was a bomb in the car? No. I believe that they could remotely stop his car or make it accelerate? Yes. I do believe that because it's actually something you can do. Vice News did something on it where you can actually just plug something into an OBD in your car and you can actually pretty much control the entire car. I know as a truck driver, when they have mechanics come out, they plug their entire computer into our OBD3 and they can make the idle go up. They could actually use their software and put the truck in gear.
Yeah,
I know all that stuff exists, but remotely, I'm not sure how. But I think that could happen.
I think so too. OnStar has a feature. If your car is stolen, and it's in pursuit, they can turn the engine off mid pursuit. I think police officers can probably do that as well. I wouldn't be surprised. Honestly, it's kind of a fear of mine. That's why I kind of want a 1971 Chevy C10, flatbed.
It's all specific.
Very specific. I want to, yeah.
Candy paint.
But yeah. But yeah, it's just it's very interesting to think like there's a lot of connections here, and if he's it's there's a it's almost a meme that people who look into these powerful politicians or leaders, rulers, whatever, that they just happen to die. This guy, in this case was a car bombing or whatever. And I don't know if that was symbolic anyway. I know that the Cabal, they do kill in specific ways. Like for instance, they chalk it up to autoerotic asphyxiation, but can't even pronounce the word. But they choke them to death on a door handle, and that's symbolic in a way, saying, if you go down a certain, the same door, right, the same route, the same, you're going to end up the same way. So, I just don't know if this is a message to other journalists that may have been, he might have been collaborating with. But yeah, it's very interesting.
Hastings' crash was actually almost certainly symbolic because it was, I believe it was Trucker, you mentioned that his fiance died in the Middle East. She was killed in a car bombing. So providing he was actually killed by a bomb or an explosive device, it's very much a sick irony that they're saying or showing. His fiance died from a car bombing. He died from a car bombing because he wrote a whole book about his fiance and her death.
Well, that's
so it's
I was
it's an
sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. It's an extremely, it's a way, it sends a message, but it also, it has the sick joke in it that, yeah, he loved her so much he went out the same way she did.
It's very interesting because I guess this goes to show why you can't really trust Wikipedia too much. Because I'm glad you're back. We couldn't hear you for the past 20 minutes or so, or 10 minutes or so. So I'm glad you're back. But I was talking about about that same thing. I lost my love in Baghdad, a modern war story, and it says here she died after her convoy was ambushed by gunmen, killing Pakma and 3 of her security guards. And it doesn't say anything about a car bombing, and there is a notation. However, the notation is from the New York Times and not the book. So if he had actually written a book, he would have gone way more in detail,
Yeah.
saying how because of course if you love his life, like shit. I mean, I don't know if I would have wrote a book about my ex-wife, but
I've actually read the book, and yeah, it goes into a lot of details about a lot of things, foreign policy being one of them. And that book, I do recommend it. However, I do also say take what he's saying in the book with a slight grain of salt, because it was written from a very emotional point of view. He
Sure.
wasn't quite in his right mindset when writing it. I do recommend, though, you read his book, The Operators, which is detailing Stanley McChrystal, because there he's back in his normal, well, not normal, but as close to normal as you can get when you've been covering wars since you were like 20. His At the time, his normal mindset. He's back. He's no longer writing from emotion. He's writing from fact. And I do recommend it because it goes into a lot of detail. How the U.S. government lied to the U.S. populace, very similar to how they did during Vietnam, about what was going on in Afghanistan, about how the generals were requesting more troops that they didn't really need, because it was, oh, we have 30,000 men to control or to, keep things peaceful in Afghanistan. Oh, it's not enough. Why? We don't know. We just need more.
that
And it was, a very interesting thing.
That is very interesting because I do remember specifically when I was in Afghanistan that there was an activation because they were like the Marine Corps needed numbers. So, they started drawing from the IRR, the inactive ready reserves. And so, for anybody who's not familiar of how the military works, when you sign up for 8 years. Even though they say it's a 4-year contract, I fell for that trick. I only thought I signed up for 5, but then I found out it was 8 later on. I fucking almost shit my pants. But but those other 3 or 4 years you have afterwards, you get out, and if the military can call you back in a wartime, and those are called ADOS, or active duty operational support. I was on that for 2.5 years. But it was like these people that got reactivated. Like mine was a voluntary reactivation. However, these guys, these other Marines, they were is not voluntary. Can you imagine not only having to go through like the first portion of like the Iraq War and then get home and feel like you've done your part, and not to get called back and then to die in that war, right? Like I mean, they were so disgruntled, very disgruntled. They didn't get paid for it was a very long. I remember there were like fucking people were pissed. I remember that much. I just don't remember the times. And it's just yeah, like why? I was talking about that earlier. Like it was kind of known that they would do patrols in poppy fields, and it's just like common knowledge. Like, oh yeah, that's just our patrol for the day. We got to keep the peace. But you're keeping the peace for who? Like the CIA. So I'm glad. Like there's like a lot of connections here that I'm really interested in.
The very interesting thing, actually, is Hastings detailed it, especially under the McChrystal, I guess you would say, administration in Afghanistan while he was there running the army and NATO forces, is they actually had a lack of a plan. They had no real plan. That's why, you had instances where I forget the name of the province, but they went back into a province that had no strategic value to them and had almost no active insurgents in it. And they committed thousands of troops to a province that they didn't even need. So they had no real plan, which actually makes it all that much worse, because they were running this whole thing, and they were basically just sending people to die for really nothing, because they didn't even have an idea of what they were doing.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I can understand why they'd want to keep this stuff under wraps. I once had a PFC when I was a sergeant, and he had a fatter stack than me. I mean, this guy, he had like combat action ribbon with like 3 stars and stuff like this. And he used to be a sergeant himself, but he got demoted for beating the shit out of his officer after he had given an order that ended up getting his buddies killed for no reason, you know? So I can imagine why they like. I mean, if like veterans found out that they were just thousands of them were sent for no apparent reason, that might be I guess motive not to say anything or try to cover it up.
Yeah, I think Hastings, though, once he stopped being a war correspondent, because he had severe PTSD from it, no surprise there. He changed course from war to foreign policy, which makes a lot of sense, and also mass surveillance once Snowden dropped his major leaks onto the internet. And the interesting thing about that is a correspondent, or not correspondent, one of the hosts of the Young Turks, which I'm not going to comment on their or news reporting, but the interesting thing is he sent a trusted friend who was also a writer and journalist himself to meet with Hastings, and the reason, at least I believe, Hastings was actually out and about driving at 4 a.m. For no apparent reason, is he was actually going out to meet with this person and discuss U.S. mass surveillance, because in his last email he said, or his last email to his colleagues, he said, "I'm on to something big, and I need to go under the radar."
Dang,
And then he died 12 hours later.
Yeah, I'm reading more of his Wikipedia page right now, and I know I've already discredited it from just that one line that we talked earlier. So I'm definitely going to take Wikipedia with a grain of salt. But this sentence kind of sticks out to me. Hastings recounted conversations with some of McChrystal's staff members in the book when during a party at which everyone was totally shit faced. One asked him, "Are you you're not going to fuck us, are you?" Another one stating, "We'll hunt you down and kill you if we don't like what you write." Hastings interpreted the drunken comments as a joke.
Yeah, because he'd gotten similar comments from other military people before. He just kind of brushed off. He figured it's part of the culture. Another part of it was also, though, he had a bit of a god complex. He believed, if he were to throw himself off a building, he would be all right. He thought he was invincible in that regard, so that was also probably had something to do with it. But yeah, he didn't take the threats seriously. However, his brother actually said in an interview during the last week or so of his life, he actually started thinking back on those threats and was a lot more fearful of them.
Yeah, I mean, I can I can understand why he would construe that that's part of the culture. You know, Blue Falcon, buddy fucker. That's a huge thing in the military. No one wants don't be a Blue Falcon. It's a pretty big insult. Um, but to hunt down and to kill, that's something else. I mean, like the people that he's talking to, you have to take into context, right? Like I'm talking from the perspective of the soldier or the Marine, where your buddy is, that's all you're fighting for. Whereas he's talking to generals, career military personnel. And I'll tell you, I mean, like the politics that are just played just on the staff NCO alone on the enlisted side was just too much for me. I was just like, fuck this, man. And most people do end up saying the same thing. And, it's just the amount of games that be played and stuff like that. Those kinds of, it's like if a general said, "We'll hunt you down and kill you," I would probably take that pretty seriously.
Yeah. So, I don't know how much experience you have with this, but when the whole situation was mismanaged, the LAPD kept backtracking on statements. They originally said they identified Hastings by his fingerprints, which is interesting because his entire body was burned. And according to a number of medical sources, if a body has undergone third-degree burns like his, there's going to be no fingerprints really left to identify his body by. And I believe it was like 2 days after they claimed to have identified him by his fingerprints, they changed that to, we identified him by his teeth through his dental records.
I mean, for usually these types of things that happen, like these car accidents or deaths that are investigated, are regular people, right? Not someone like this. Is there's not this many discrepancies, are there? I mean, like, we're talking, like, there's some, not only what you just mentioned, but there's some other things that you mentioned earlier. Like, it just seems so sloppily done. If it is a cover up, like maybe it was a hastily done. If this was a strike, an assassination, I think that you think there would be more, I guess, caution or care taken. I mean, like, with a whole, like, completely different type of engine. I'm not, I don't know. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I chalk up the lack of, discretion, and, not, it's very obvious. I chalk that up to the fact that it is the LAPD who was mostly involved in this, on the scenes and doing the evaluations, which they're underfunded, they're very unprofessional, and they just don't do a good job at just about anything. They're bad at policing. They're a laughing stock of the police forces, honestly.
Oh yeah,
Everyone agrees, of all the police forces in the US, they are one of the, if not the worst, departments.
I avoid them, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't go to LA that much.
So, and that makes sense, considering that their coroner, that they had do it, Dr. Ribe, was, charged and found guilty of falsifying evidence in his coronary reports. I put a picture of an article covering that. And it's really interesting because, like, they put a person who's known for falsifying evidence in charge of the autopsy, which is just interesting. And then they also released, an autopsy like about 3 days after the crash, which is insane because this is something that takes weeks for them to do. It's unbelievable how, poorly this is handled.
Yeah. I asked earlier this question, and Trucker answered, but I wanted to ask you, why. I mean, we see the kind of stuff that he was looking into, the type of people, but, like, what do you think he was on? Like, what do you personally believe he, like, this big thing that he was had to go under radar? What do you think he was going to uncover?
Personally, I believe that given, when this happened, this was not even a month after Snowden released all this information about the NSA. I believe he had found something in the thousands upon thousands of documents that were leaked, that was seriously, either illegal or at best it's just immoral, and that he was found something in here and he was going to do another major bombshell story on it. And I think the reason is, no one else has really found this yet, is probably simply because, the sheer volume of stuff that was leaked. There are still people going through it, finding new material to this day. And I think most likely, he managed to stumble across something, or he just knew what he was looking at more than the average person, and said, this is a major problem. There's actually a number of theories. That's the one I personally look at as the most likely. But there's actually a number of theories about, what his last story was about. There are people who say it was about John Brennan. There are people who say it was about, NSA drone surveillance. There's people, I'm just looking through my notes, people who say that he was researching a privacy lawsuit against the Florida socialite Jill Kelly, against the Department of Defense and the FBI. So there's a lot of different theories. I think the NSA is the most likely one, be it drone surveillance or mass surveillance, simply because that was what was happening at the time. That was the biggest thing that was going on, and Hastings was known for going after these big stories. That was what he was known for.
Now, do you believe that whatever he was on trying to find, because he did talk to some of his journalist buddies before he died, do you think it'll ever be uncovered, or you think it's just going to, fly to the wayside?
That's a good question. I think if it's going to be uncovered, it's going to be uncovered by everyday people, not by journalists, because they've moved on from what was happening in 2013. It's obviously not going to be the government. So I think if it's going to happen, it's going to happen through everyday people looking at this carefully. It's, what makes Hastings such an interesting case is the fact that this was, at the time, such big news. He had died, and for about a month, it was dominating headlines. It was being talked about on the news. And then it just kind of disappeared off the face of the planet, and no one really talked about it afterwards. I took this up December of 2018. And I'm coming up now on the 2-year marker of actually researching this. And it's incredibly interesting because, like, no one talks about it. No one discusses, what happened. I guess because there's all these other made crazy things that are happening every day. But I think if you want to, have an idea of what's happening today with a lot of the government surveillance programs, you really do have to look at this period of time, because this is when, we first really became fully aware of the extent that it was mass surveillance was being performed. This is when we first, had a full clue of this is happening to everyone, not just, people who are looking at certain things, not even, just it's everyone. No one's exempt from this sweeping eye.
Yeah.
And that's, if you want to have an idea of what is happening now with mass surveillance and all that, you really do have to look at what was happening in the summer of 2013, because that is when this all broke.
Yeah, that is interesting. What do you think the average person like myself listening to this, what should they take from this story? Like what's the like not the message or the moral, because it's obviously yeah, don't trust the government. I'm not sure, but what do you think the average person should take away from this?
I think it's that, obviously there's the whole don't trust the government. That's the most cliche, but I think it's also very much a case of, don't let what happened to him scare you into being silent. Because this is, it's a message. He was the most prominent journalist. He was named one of the most influential figures of 2010 by several magazines. He was a very influential person. He was the top journalist of the decade prior. And killing him off, it sends a message to journalists, especially, don't mess with us, because, you want, you want to have, you want to write about us. Well, this is what's going to happen if you don't write about us the way we want you to.
Yeah,
So it's really a case of don't let, the message get to you. It's not don't ignore it, but it's it's don't let it get to you and make you not report what you find.
Yes, that's very good. That's a very powerful thing to take away from this. Especially for anybody who and especially for all of us inside this chat room, because we consider yourself, if you follow conspiracies, a truther, right? You follow the truth, you follow the facts, and you shouldn't shy away from people who threaten to I guess hurt you or eliminate you in order to seek that truth. I have mad respect for his investigative journalism, or his integrity of his investigative journalism. But I guess I can't hear me on Twitch, which is interesting. Oh, I know why, because I'm muting my mic on the Twitch end. So, but anyways, what I wanted to say was, you know, journalism these days is a joke. It's a straight up joke. Everyone knows it. Fake news, the meme. And you just like watch these journalists on TV, or what is attempted to be investigative journalism, and it's just a horrible conflation of just what the truth really is, appeal to emotion and fear. And I think that a lot of these journalists, maybe shame on them for not having more integrity, but maybe not so much. Maybe because maybe they really are threatened with their lives. Or maybe it's just a paycheck, right? Like, hey, you want to do this you want to do this piece? Well, there goes your job, and your chance to sit at the desk at the Fox 11 News. So I'm not sure, hey, I think the message should definitely, for anybody, like I said, for anyone who wants the truth, to not be afraid to seek the truth. I feel like I've been hogging the mic a lot, and so I guess, and we also have our event starting here, another one on the Bigfoot or Sasquatch. But I wanted to ask you, you have any closing statements about this, about Michael Hastings?
I would say, if the major thing, to look at this is, don't look at it as a message, look at it as what it is, which is murder. Don't let, don't let the message of it get to you, because if you let that happen, you're going to end up similar to a lot of the journalists, if not all of them. Of the journalists we have these days, I'd say the only one who's anywhere comparable is Glenn Greenwald. And even he's, his quality of reporting has gone down in recent years, I'd say. Um, you know, you have to look at this as what it is, which is, it's a murder of, and it's a direct attack on your freedom of speech and expression, because that's all he was trying to do. He was trying to convey ideas and facts, and that, he can't do that when he's dead. It's, that's the major thing. I have to say, there actually is other things about this that I've been looking into. I haven't really discussed them because there isn't evidence to back them up, and I'm not going to say anything without the appropriate evidence to support it. But when you have a situation like this, where someone like Michael Hastings dies, and then all of the reporting about it dries up as well, you have to immediately look at it as, why do they not want this seen? Why is this suddenly just dried up out of thin air just because, oh, a coroner's report came out, even though it does not line up whatsoever with, even the pictures of the body. In fact, the pictures of the body are incredibly difficult to get a hold of. I have a person who I've been working with. They, I can't say, who they are or who they work for. I'm under an NDA on that, but they sent these pictures to me, and I was just like, no wonder, because before that, the only evidence really against the autopsy report, which is essentially the backbone of their story, is the person who performed it is less than reputable. However, when you have pictures of his actual body there in front of you, you can immediately see this is all wrong. He doesn't have broken bones. He's got a missing leg, even though the autopsy report is saying, oh, it's only broken. Um, you know, they're claiming, toxins in his system. However, in the same breath, they also say, but there's such small amounts that they couldn't have actually affected him. Which is, it's such an interesting thing, because like they're trying to lead people in circles with what they give and what you can see without having to pry into it too deep. They lead you in circles. It's basic confusion tactics. They don't want you to be able to, say, or draw lines. They want you to say, well, did he have drugs in his system or did he not? Were they actually, powerful enough? If they weren't, then why did you mention them? In, social media posts, because this wasn't even just in the report. And then, if you're familiar with how the time frame for these things works, it makes you wonder, why did this report come out only 3 days after the crash? This should have taken at least 2 weeks to perform a actual report or autopsy on his body. Why, there's so many questions that are unanswered, mostly because there isn't the evidence to back them up, which, as poorly as they covered this up, they did a good enough job at covering it up to, tie up the loosest ends, who did it, who was there, license plates, officer names and IDs. You're not going to find that readily available. It's not displayed, or it's just straight up not even shown. They don't have pictures. You're not going to find, if you look, the only people for names that I could find for who responded, one of them is now the spokesperson for the coroner's department. The other one's dead. He died in a motorcycle accident about a year later. And it's like, there's so many things that it's like, where could it possibly lead to? Like, yeah, there's the Piper Tech building lead, where it's the closest thing you have to a direct link between the federal government and the crash, where, a helicopter that had been filming and monitoring the car after it had exploded went and flew to this Piper Tech building, landed there, and, Piper Tech, it's a building shared by the LAPD and the FBI for storing equipment. So that's like, there's so many ends you can go down, It's impossible to really say who did it. It's not, like a game of Clue where you can easily, rule out all of these things because you've seen it everywhere else. It really is a situation of, I don't think we're ever going to know who directly was responsible, what agency. I think it's more a question of, people have to understand this happened. We know for a fact that it happened. We know what Hastings did. We know what he was planning on doing, most likely, and we can point a firm finger in this direction. And especially based on recent events with, all the federal government and like past few months with Corona, the riots and all of that, people are really, I think, starting to realize, yeah, the federal government is terrible. They do all sorts of illegal things and no one covers it. And the thing is, now that people are realizing that, I think the world is in a position to see, what happened to Hastings and accept that, yeah, he was murdered. I think people are in a state of mind where they would be able to understand that, yeah, he was reporting on illegal government activities that we should have known about. So, if anyone, has any further questions and they want to, DM me about them, feel free. If you want to, if you want to see, the pictures of his body, in correlation with the autopsy report, let me know and I'll send you, the link to the autopsy report and a picture of his body, so that you can see, what's going on. And, I also have 2 Reddit articles up about it. I'll put a link to each of those below so you can read those. I'm a much better writer than I am a speaker. But
Well, you sound like you did a pretty good job, brother. And yeah, it's definitely gruesome, and there's a lot to take in from this, And unfortunately, right now with the whole coronavirus and riots going on and stuff like that, important stuff like this go to the wayside, right? Things that can enlighten and open people's eyes to the truth of what's really going on, and maybe why the things that are going on right now are. So I would like to open up the floor to anybody that does have any questions right now. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
All right. Well, let me thank Mr. Gaming Geek for an excellent podcast. We have actually about 10 minutes till the next one on Bigfoot starts. But we might as well wrap this one up for the time being because we seem to have finished it. So we are the Roundtable Discord server. Just Google Roundtable Discord to find us. We're on all social media. We're streaming on Twitch. We're on YouTube. And you can find it all through RT Portal, RT Podcast on the server. So thanks very much, everybody. And thanks a lot, Gaming Geek. It's an important story. I saw the pictures. It was fucking horrible. Really fucking grotesque. But I can't post it on the server because it's graphic, but yeah, the guy got fucking killed. So, thank you.